Hey now, welcome to the dirty side of the track, America's leading Formula One podcast. We just completed the Bahrain Grand Prix, and I'm so excited you're here. I'm Brian Saperstein. That's Rob Vale. Rob, take us away.
So excited. That was epic. Public service announcement. There are massive spoilers coming for the Bahrain Grand Prix. So if you haven't watched it and you're going to be one of these people that's going to watch it on demand, then just save this episode for a later date. We're going to take a walk through news and social, and then we're going to walk through kind of race week. So we're going to touch on what we saw in practice. We're going to see what we thought about qualifying, last-minute nerves and tweaks that Brian and I had on our fantasy lineups, and then the race itself. But it seems a bit weird to wait all the way until the end before we talk about the race. For a very, very quick second, all I have to say is, Ferrari!
Ferrari. 1-2 for Ferrari. How cool was that? And I'm going to use it again. Carlos Sainz.
You have been pushing that all week on social, and I hope it sticks, Brian, because if anyone starts copying it, we know who came up with it first.
It's not going to stick because it's terrible, but it's Carlos Sainz. How good was that? How great a race. And I feel for Max and Sergio and Red Bull fans, the way that happened at the very end, to have the rug yanked out from a second and fourth. Just, I know we're going to get there, but man, Ferrari, Red Bull, there's so much more to go. But I actually really enjoyed the race. It got a little boring for about 15 laps. I can live with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's work our way back up to that. I've still kind of got like the adrenaline pumping through my body at the moment as we're trying to do this kind of like record almost as soon as the race is over so we can get this out to folk. It's quite funny kind of. We normally come into these podcasts where we spent all week researching. We've got our notes, we've got everything. And I've got my classic old school pen and paper as I was frantically writing down notes as each lap went by. But we'll come to those. So let's do what we do and kick it off with news and social. So what you got for us, Brian?
Well, obviously the week started with news of Sebastian Vettel and a positive COVID test. So Aston Martin brought in longtime super sub Nico Hülkenberg, and it wasn't just rumors. I mean, we actually brought him back, and it was nice to have him. So made his return for Aston Martin, a return that unfortunately saw them towards the back, but we'll get to that. I found it interesting. Lewis Hamilton decided that Sir Lewis Hamilton wasn't enough, so he added his mother's name to his name, and he is now being addressed as Sir Lewis Hamilton Larbalastier. But on track, apparently, we're just calling him Lewis Hamilton. While we're speaking of names, we got some clarity. It's Zhou Guanyu. Do not tell Crofty that, because he goes every other time a different direction with that one.
That was so funny.
The whole race. The whole race. He talked about it in qualifying and then screwed it up every other time. I would say there was a great, funny, in my mind, Sky Sports video this week with Martin Brundle and Natalie Pinkham, where they kind of did a name that tune challenge where they had to do things in a certain number of guesses. And it was just fun to see behind the scenes of some of the F1 personalities who cover the sport. And the last thing I'll say before we can finally get to this amazing race to start the season is, and I'm going to do it fast. So Rob, you're not going to say anything about this. We're just going to get through this. The 2021 Abu Dhabi report finally came out. The takeaways are there will be a virtual race control room to assist the race directors. There are 2 race directors now replacing the old one. I'm not even going to name that person because we're moving on. There will be no direct radio communications between the teams and the race director. And the unlapping procedures have been defined from any cars. It's Article 55.13. Any cars that have been lapped by the leader will be required to pass the cars on the lead lap and the safety car. It's now all cars. All cars that have been lapped by the leader will be required to pass the cars on the lead lap and the safety car. The last thing I would note, and just to close it, and this is the worst part of all of it, is the governing body will also add an additional senior regulatory legal counsel to strengthen the legal support during the F1 competitions, and especially during the weekend and on F1 sporting matters. So boo to all of that, but excited for 2022. We're done talking about Abu Dhabi. Now the report's out, never coming back.
I'm sorry, I've got to add one thing to it. I actually was okay with it because the main sentiment of it, they kind of did throw Massey under there, and they went, yeah, human error. He screwed up. What do you want us to do? Sorry, guys, but the result stands. You guys all contributed to it by layering this ridiculous amount of pressure onto the guy. And guess what? He buckled. He screwed up. We've moved him out of there. He's not doing that any role. You're not going to be allowed to talk to him anymore. So let's move on. And I thought, you know what? The other week, me and you had both discussed there was no good ending to this one. Actually, that's probably about as good as it could have been. They didn't try to hide behind something and try to claim it was all the mean team principal's fault for bullying the kid in the control room. They just kind of fell on the sword a little bit, although it was Mass's sword, and they kind of threw him off to the side. But anyway,
it was March 18th. They could have released this February 18th or January 18th.
Of course they could, but there we are. Right, so
cars on track, qualifying. Rob,
no. Back up. Practice. Now, we're not going to go through all three phases of practice.
I want to get to the qualifying.
I know you do. We've got a whole show to fill, so come on, chill your boots. All I just want to quickly say is, practice, mainly third practice. There were many texts going back between myself and Brian because we were trying to not give away each other's hands as to who we had in our fantasy lineups, but both of us were in major panic stations because third practice threw up a whole raft of things in my view. It was clear Mercedes were not sandbagging because you can't get away with sandbagging right to the end of third practice and then hope you're going to bring it all together in qualifying. We had McLaren just not even bothering turning up. We just had so many things. Then we had K-Mag come in and drop it on 7th in the end of third practice, and you're like, oh man. I mean, I thought I'm not really that interested in practice a lot of times, but kind of as a fine tuner for my fantasy and for a sneak peek with what was going to come in qualifying. I thought that was actually pretty interesting, and it was so good to see Magnussen and Bottas in the top 10 at the end of there, which then leads us into we move to onto qualifying. So where did you want to kick us off on qualifying then?
Well, first of all, it was awesome to see people actually going for it. I would say there was some interesting tire work being done. It was all on softs. The whole qualifying was softs, which for anyone who follows us on Twitter at F1 Dirty Side, you'd have seen this early this morning. I woke up and sent out a note on the allocations of tires remaining, new and used by yes, I know. Come on, Rob. It's important. And it mattered because we saw a varying degree of degradation throughout the race. But anyway, back to qualifying. I loved the new graphics. B, it was a good reminder to me that it's 18 minutes for Q1, 15 minutes for Q2, and 12 minutes for Q3 because there's less cars through each. So a 3-minute difference going through. As I said, everybody on softs. It was kind of interesting to watch the teammate comparisons, but boy, you learned right away in Q1, at least for me, I learned Aston Martin and McLaren have very real trouble. And there was no goofing around in practice anymore and saying, oh, they'll turn it up. Aston Martin and McLaren, you knew going into the weekend they were going to be in bad shape. And we saw it in practice, and I believed it enough to keep them out of my fantasy lineup. But, man, that was at that point, I'm staring at the TV. And then Alex Albon made it into Q2. I loved that. He outdid Nicky. Good for Williams. But, I just sat there thinking, this is going to be an interesting first handful of races as these teams are very much on the back foot.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I was a little nervous that we'd been bigging Haas up a little bit too much, and then we were going to watch both of those two crash out in Q1. So when both of them made it through to Q2, and then when K-Mag made it through to 3, and Mick was like, I think he was only in the second drop zone. He was like Ocon, I think, missed out one of the last people that came around, pushed him out, and Mick was like the second one to be dropped out. So no embarrassing. It's not like he just made it into Q2 and then was the first one out. I mean, they had a real chance of getting both cars through to Q3, which was so good to see. And then Q3, for a while I thought, did Bottas and Kevin Magnussen only do one run?
Magnussen did because he had those troubles with his hydraulics, so he came out late. I can't remember about Valtteri's qualifying run in Q3.
Everybody had gone out and done the first run, and there were 3 of them down the bottom with no time. And I thought, don't be one of these things where you've done it, you've managed to get into Q3, and then you're just not going to be able to get out. And I'm pretty sure Bottas might have been one of those as well. I was like, oh man. And then they did, and they came out, and they put sometimes, Kevin Magnussen, where did he end up? He got 7th and Bottas got 6th, right? It was, I was cheering at my TV at that point.
Unbelievably amazing. It was like It was like, Marsha. It was all about Ferrari in Q3. And it was so much fun. I texted you and I wrote in my notes here, get the Haas working, please. Like, get that car out there. We want to see it. And then it brought up an idea, and I'm going to do this and annoy some people. But if Magnussen was that far ahead of Schumacher, and it wasn't a ton, but in terms of places, it looked, like a decent little gap. It wasn't a ton of time. And Nikita was always that far behind Schumacher. I mean, it's a big difference from Mazepin to Magnussen.
Yeah.
And then you kind of start thinking about the year in between when Haas threw away 2021 to get this car ready. And Nikita Mazepin and his father, big billionaire Mazepin, funded the team and kind of kept him afloat for that year to invest in a year where Nikita's now not in the seat for a million reasons we're not going into. But man, like, Haas kind of is making out here. I mean, now they got a car that works and it's looking good. I'm just worried. Here's my last Haas note. I know we hit Haas a lot, so I'm happy Haas did well, or else we'd look like, ridiculous morons. But
we do
and
anyway.
we will. Yeah, well, we're gonna do that anyway. Exactly, throughout the year. Don't worry, we'll do that more often than not. But all these teams with, and I know there's a cost cap, but with, teams that are built a certain way, have had success a certain way, have a chance to bring upgrades and changes. And in 2009, we talked about Braun, and Pit Lane Paul gave us a report about Braun that was epic. At that time, the upgrades and changes didn't come through as fast. And so they got caught by the end of the year. They had a great first, 2/3, half of the year where they built up a lead, and then it was being whittled away. And I'm not saying Haas is in front, but I worry that the teams that behind them, and even the teams around them, will continue with upgrades and changes. It took Haas a whole year and a half to basically build this car. So I want them to strike now and strike often, get as many points as they can, because I worry about the teams next to them progressing and past them. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope their technology developments keep up. But so for me, that was, as I watched qualifying, I said, strike now, Haas.
Yeah, I mean, the only difference that I would say is that it was quite obvious that Braun came to that season with the secret trick up their sleeve that was the double diffuser. And it made their car head and shoulders better than everybody else's. What I hope, and again, only time's going to tell, is that what Haas have done is use that year to play catch-up on everybody else to get themselves to have both a competitive car, just forget new regulations, just make the car more competitive, and at the same time fold the new regulations in on top to allow them to be solid mid-table, because that will be massive progress for them. And we'll get into it more as the race unfolded, but it was looking that way in qualifying. They didn't go and get pole or have any lightning quick speed, but Kevin Magnussen was there. Mick was all in the Q3, all bar like tenths, not kind of multitudes of seconds like they were last year when they were just so far behind. So I mean, one race in, or well, we haven't even discussed the race yet, but let's just say first qualifying in, and I'm thinking that Haas were looking better this year is looking pretty sound. Us thinking that McLaren were looking pretty good, we look like idiots. Us liking Aston Martin because their livery shows that you can't judge a book by its cover.
Well, I admitted very clearly I didn't think they'd be fast. I just thought that the car was sexy. But I have a dumb question, and I haven't thrown this to you in advance. And I love your thoughts. And to the listeners, here's sort of a random philosophical question. With no tire restrictions in Q2 anymore, where every team has free choice when the race starts, why are there 3 rounds of qualifying?
I would say it's to make a show.
It is at this point, right?
It's for TV purposes. I mean, let's be honest. That's how it used to be back in the day when I were a lad, when all this were fields.
Walk to school uphill both ways in the snow.
I carried my bike to save on tire wear.
5 miles.
Well, it was just an hour. I think it was an hour anyway, as far as I remember, of just everyone goes out and does as many laps as they can and tries to be the fastest. And really, nobody really went out and showed their hand too early. So you got this big, huge traffic jam in the last 3 minutes or whatever when everyone's going out trying to set the fastest lap. So I get why that wasn't a spectacle, because not a lot happened for a long time. Commentators have got to sit around trying to make nothing be interesting. So they kind of chopped it up to be a bit more high drama of, ooh, you're going to drop out after Q3. And I'm with you. It doesn't. The tire situation now means why, but I would say it's just for that drama, the jeopardy, and the TV audience.
Well, Brundle brought up a great point. Like, why do we get rid of the tire restriction? And he pointed out, and Crofty tried to say, well, it's more exciting when every team can choose the tire. But the point I'd make is, if there's no benefit to being cut in Q2, like being the 11th starter, used to get free choice, and the 10th had to use the same tire. So it actually would sort of promote additional midfield battles and create strategic questions in qualifying. Now there are no strategic questions in qualifying. Just go out on softs and run. And so to me, I ask philosophically, are we better off in qualifying without that tire restriction, which I know is complicated and nerdy. And again, for all new listeners, basically, when you finished Q2, if you made it to Q1, you had to use those exact same tires. Now, it doesn't matter what you do. Everyone goes out on softs. And so teams who may want to run a long first stint would try to qualify out of Q2 in mediums. And so there was a lot of, jockeying around. Now it doesn't make any difference. So to me, I still love qualifying. I still watch it. And I think it's great. It's sort of changed the point of it in my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for any like-minded individual out there, for any other tire nerds, it's probably really impacted all you guys. Until I really met you and started talking about tire allocations, I didn't even really know that was a rule. So when you were getting all kind of like, oh, they're dropping the tire rule for Q2, I was like, what's the tire rule for Q2? And as much as you might get Charlola signs trending, the one you dropped this morning of tires are sexy is not trending. It's...
I had just woken up. You got to give me a little credit. I was up late on a Zoom with guys from around the globe, friends of mine, and we were drinking a little bit. And it made sense.
But that's even worse. The first thing you think of when you wake up is tires.
It's race day, baby, race day.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the race. Let's shift gears and talk about the race. I was so excited.
Okay, so before we go into the race, I had a race of my own for the race. So my son was swimming in a state championship down on the southern edge of Connecticut, which was, according to Waze, 50 minutes away from my house. He finished up his race. Fair play to him. He changed super quick. We got all of his gear back in the car, jumped in the car, turned on Waze. It was 10 past 10. 50 minutes to get home had me arriving back in my house at 11 a.m., which was when the race started. I didn't, any officers listening out there, I didn't speed. I stuck to the posted speed limits all the way back, but I knew that the vast majority, 99% of the journey was highways, and I had that last 2 miles where I really was fate. Whatever it did with traffic lights is what was going to determine it. And the gods shone on me. Green lights all the way. I parked in my garage, came sprinting into the house. My wife, bless her, had already turned on the TV for me. And the cars were just finishing. They were just finishing the formation lap. Literally, the last couple of cars were slotting into position. And I just kind of collapsed in a heap with my notebook. I was like, oh my God. So my blood was pumping, my heart was racing before the race had even started. But sorry, Brian, you were about to say.
No, that's great. No, that's great. It was an interesting start. I was so excited to watch these cars line up, and I didn't know what to anticipate. It was great to see Charles get away strong. And really, honestly, the first three kind of held position. I know Carlos got close to Max, and Max is becoming the king of the late breakers. He's stealing the title from Daniel. I feel like Max goes further into these corners than anybody at this point, and he's doing a great job. Like, he nailed it. He didn't do any of those like last season cutoffs. These were really nice moves he was putting on people. But it was interesting that Checo had a rough start. I think of Checo as being really sound in every aspect of the race, and Lewis and K-Mag got past him. And at the same time, Valtteri dropped 8 positions. Was he in reverse? I'm not sure exactly what happened. Something happened with the car. Yeah.
When they did the overhead, I'm kind of thinking, well, who's kind of tagged him or cut him off and meant that he's had to stop? And I think it was just one of those bad days at the office where he just got bogged down and just didn't seem to pull away. As all listeners know, we're big Valtteri fans, and both of us had him in our fantasy team. So as I watched that start and everyone going around him, I'm like, no. But it was interesting. Like, the whole second half for me, the drama quickly became, in the first couple laps, the second half of the field and how close they were, following right behind each other, 2, sometimes 3 wide into corners. And I know
Esteban tagged Mick, but Mick made an amazing recovery, a full spin, got it facing the right direction, and powered out of it. I mean, that alone, that was a video game. That was a video game. Did you see him
catch that? That was when they showed the inside cockpit view. I mean, the reactions to A, catch that, and B, catch that when you're facing the right direction, just carry on like, yeah, what happened? I'm fine. Off I go again.
I mean, unbelievable. And then the announcers were rusty. At one point, Brundle called him Michael Schumacher, and Crofty kept calling him Guan Yu Zhou, and then going back to Zhou Guan Yu, and then Guan Yu Zhou. And it was just, and then K-Mag kept messing up the first corner, going far too deep and unable to salvage it like Max and losing spots. And then you saw Bottas come through. Valtteri was just coming through. I got stuck behind a little bit behind Yuki for a little while there. But at this point, my last note on the first couple laps, McLaren. Oh God, it went from bad to worse. I mean, it was like we were like watching a slow motion person falling down the stairs. I'm like, oh God, just make it stop. Give them 2 spots somewhere, something, please.
So my notes from the first kind of 5 or so laps. I got the thing about the name as well. My son was walking through the room at one point. He said, did they just call him Muck Schumacher? Like he's sponsored by McDonald's now? Because you're right. I think maybe after he'd kind of struggled with calling him Michael Schumacher, he was trying to recover quickly, and it became Muck Schumacher, which is kind of, I bet he's loving it. Anyway, cars seemed under full fuel, and they mentioned it in the commentary about them kind of being heavier. Had they done enough test runs with fully laden down cars? Because it wasn't just K-Mag. Lots of people were struggling, it seemed, with kind of slowing cars down into corners, whether it's a combination of the new wheels, the brakes, heavier cars. I don't know, but there was a lot of kind of not tidy corners, let's put it that way. And I did notice that, again, trying not to get too excited ahead of the season, but they did seem to follow so much easier. There was you could visibly see that cars that were right behind other cars were securely planted to the track. There was none of this kind of sliding through corners behind them. No radio messages of, oh, I'm burning my tires, I can't follow anymore. There was none of that in the entire race, which is an awesome sign for things to come, I think. So I'll kind of just move us through into kind of, I think I had my notes down at lap 12. Lewis came in for change of tires. And he went to the hards, and I thought, okay, here we go. Classic Mercedes. They're going to put some super stint now on the hard tyres, take it through to, what do we have, 57, 58 laps? So taking through to maybe about 47, 48, and then put a set of soft shoes on and watch him sprint to the end. Obviously, that's the game plan. That was Bambi on ice when he came out after that pit stop. I've never seen a car fishtail like that. Oh, wow.
So around the same, I can't even get my thoughts out. I'm so excited. So around the same time that this was happening, the realization hit me that at least in this race, there's a clear bottom 3. Williams, Aston Martin, McLaren. And at the end, it was actually not in that order. But they just were not competitive. Now, I do believe that McLaren has the pace in the car. Maybe at these slow corners, they got to work on the brakes. You know, we're going to talk about Saudi Arabia, the next race at the end here. That may be a good redemption opportunity for McLaren, at least to get out of the bottom 3 into the midfield. But so I watched these 3 teams, and it was just kind of fascinating to see them battling towards the back. You're right. That pit stop, in my mind, actually was a big time shot for all of Formula One to start working on their strategy. And what we learned were the following things. The C1, so they're on the hardest, that was the hardest of hards. Like there's no harder tire in the range, nerd over here. But so they come out on lower temperature tire blankets than they ever have before. B, these cars are heavier, full of fuel. So early stops to hards is going to be a challenge. And there's a rumor that, and Brundle brought it up, that they're trying to go to no blankets whatsoever, which makes no sense whatsoever. And he was sliding everywhere, like you said. And the interesting thing is now they told Nico, the super sub on Aston Martin, you can't come in, your car's too hot.
Yeah.
So now you have to have an in-lap where you are cooling your car so that you can pit. So you're losing time. B, the pit stops are longer. They take longer, at least at this point. The tires are bigger. They're figuring it out. But a 2.5 is now, as of today, is a good stop. I know they'll bring that down. But so it's going to take longer to pit. You're going to have to slow down on your way in, more so on your in lap. And then your out lap, you have less traction than you've ever had if you go to the hard tire, because everybody was sliding around on their hard tires. So it's the pit stop is much different than it's been in years past in terms of how you get into the pits, the time in the pits, and then the time out. And so I watched that and I'm like, whoa, the strategists have work cut out for them finally. And they clearly weren't ready for this. Like, they did not do enough, like you said, long runs in practice or enough changes in this scenario with the fuel load. It was shocking to me. And it all, in my mind, all came undone. And I know we'll talk about Lewis's next pit, because I think that his next one after this also taught us a lot. But before we get there, the juiciest part of the race in my mind, Max
lap
versus
17
Charles.
by any chance?
Lap 17. I'll let you talk about it, because it just it was so good.
Oh, no, we'll both weigh in on this, because I think we were both like going back and forward each other on the text. We were like, this is so cool. And you were tweeting away at the same time of like, this is epic. There was a series of, I mean, I didn't even count it. I'm going to have to say it was maybe 4 or 5 laps where they just followed each other within a whisker, and it was wheel to wheel, and every time Max had the straight line speed and caught Charles up and went past him, and you're like, well, this is it, now off go Red Bull. And then Charles, I didn't appreciate what he was doing until I heard his interview at the end of the race, when he said after he was taken, he was then lifting ever so slightly to almost allow Max to go past, because right there was the DRS detection zone, so that he could be the one second over that line and pick up the DRS to then repass Max again. And it happened, I think it was 3 times in succession, and it was just so exciting.
So exciting. And Max would pass on the outside and sparks would be flying. And I mean, it's so rare to see the lead of the race switch back and forth with such close racing, such clean racing from guys who are just putting it all out there. And, you mentioned that you didn't hear a lot of people saying that, they'd burn off their tires. Well, I think Max did, but that was his driving, that was not the car. That was him really going for it, and really running those things into the ground, trying to get that position. That was so good. I couldn't even type. My fingers, my thumbs, I was so excited. My Apple Watch said, check heart rate. Something's wrong. I'm like, it's Max and Charles. And so it was so good, man. I'm going to go back and rewatch that particular section over and over again. And I think even Brundle and Croft, you were like, how long can this go on? Hopefully till the next pit stops.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe we are overhyping what we're seeing just because we want it to be true, but I felt that there was nothing about either car, especially Max, really having to have a run for a few laps to see if he could get past him, and then have to back off so he could cool down, sort the car out, and then go again. It was just all out wheel-to-wheel racing until really, like you say, Max overcooked his tyres. And that's nothing to do with following too close. That was just being super aggressive and battery on full to try and get past him. And the way he was, it was just awesome to watch. And then it kind of, he messed his tyres. He backs off a little bit. And then the race kind of lulled a little bit at that point then. It kind of settled down, which is every race goes in ebbs and flows, right? But I think I don't think my heart could have taken if it had stayed like that for the next at that point for the next 30 laps. It just couldn't have.
Your heart like or my pants. That was a lot.
Great. But what I did in my nerdiness write down on lap 23, a couple of little observations while things had kind of like slowed a little bit, was that Alpha were looking a lot racier than
Tauri or Romeo?
Romeo, sorry, yeah, of course. Oh, yeah, okay.
Just
Alpha
checking.
T and Alpha R and Alpha T, right?
Well, no one can hear the PH and the F difference.
But maybe we'll have to call them Alpha. Alpha. But anyway, actually, both of those two teams, they were both looking, all the teams with an A, in fact, apart from Aston, Alpine were looking pretty good as well. They were just kind of going about their business without kind of setting the world on fire. But I looked at the differences, and from covering 7th through to 13th was 20 seconds, and 10th back to 17th was 20 seconds, which after 23 laps into a normal Grand Prix, we would normally see much bigger spreads than that. So yes, we like to think about the front runners being able to follow each other and stay close, but actually I thought the midfield kind of stayed fairly little pockets of cars, but no one had to like drop back into those spaces to cool down because, okay, the TV cameras don't follow the midfield as much, but they've got the same issues. They need to be able to follow the car in front as well. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then lap 28, which was only hardly any laps later, really, Mercedes pulled the plug on the hard tyre experiment, and Lewis came in and went to mediums. I think they probably could have made that call a couple of laps earlier, to be honest. But
totally. And like I said, I think that was that second pit stop. You realize he's on a 3-stopper, obviously, at this point. But it's like you said, they could have pulled the plug on that experiment. It taught us a lot about the way these tires are going to react to these cars in race conditions and what to start expecting. It was interesting. He even said it was too early when he went to the hards. And then halfway into the race, they go to the mediums. Clearly there's going to be another tire coming through. So just a big strategic kind of shift in the way teams took it. And my favorite was Max when he came in shortly thereafter, after that battle with Charles. And he comes in and he gets back on the radio and he sort of starts freaking out. He says, "Why are you telling me to take it so easy on my outlaps? And I'm not doing that ever again. Never, ever, never, never." Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, the world champion is coming unglued in there. He doesn't like when people tell him what to do. So
he really did.
It all changed. He was so unhappy in that car so many times throughout the race.
And around this kind of time as well, we were kind of focusing in on, I'm going to call him Zhu. I'm just going to stick with that as the name. It's easier for me to say, and I'll be
Joe,
consistent.
But okay.
Okay, fine, Zhou. I'll go with Zhou.
Thank you.
He was being pretty racy. I was impressed with him for his debut.
Oh, yeah.
But then one I felt sorry for, and the commentators kept picking on it as well, was Bottas stuck behind Tsunoda yet again. Does it?
I know. It was, it was interesting. I actually feel like a lot of people had really good races. And I think the ones that are going to get ignored are the Aston Martin races. I have no notes whatsoever about Lance or Nico. I have nothing. The only thing I have from Williams is obviously I thought Albon did pretty well. Had a couple overtakes. He got overtaken a bunch, but he was out there doing his thing. I do agree. Zhou Guanyu, I thought, had a really solid race for a first race. I would say it was a great sign of things to come. Valtteri, amazingly finishing where he finished. We'll get into that in a second. Worked his way through the field, and it was kind of silent. It was like he was a silent assassin. From this point forward, he just started overtaking cars and had a good strategy. And it was awesome to watch. And all of a sudden I look at the screen and he's 8th. I'm like, what?
And a completely non-scientific, non-sporty F1 term at all, but that Alfa Romeo looks sexy on track.
Oh, man. And the wheels, too. Oh, the Alfa Romeo is great. I mean, it looks great. And I would say Crofty and Brundle, again, kept getting the cars screwed up, where they would, it's Valtteri and they're saying it's Joe, and then it's, Latifi and they're saying it's Alex, and it's like nonstop confusion. Mick Schumacher, and the numbers are hard to see in the back corner of the car. I would say that they need to make them bigger for old people like us.
Yeah, there was one point where they actually got completely the wrong way round as to who was taking who. I didn't actually write it down because other stuff was happening at the same time, but I want to say it was somebody making a pass on George, and they said, "Oh, and there's Russell taking whoever it was," and no, it wasn't. George had just been taken. But
there was also one point very briefly where they went in car with Kevin Magnussen, and he was behind, I want to say Pierre at the point, and they just showed on the bottom Kevin Magnussen and Kevin Magnussen. I'm like, he's overtaking himself. Well, all right. Everyone's working out some kinks the first weekend. But and then for me, I won't go into it yet in case you had other stuff. For me, the next point was Pierre's car.
Well, so
yeah. Do you have stuff before then?
Not really. I'm kind of leading into that. Was that I'd kind of done I'd written down all the teams, and I'd kind of written how I was thinking as the race was going on. So I didn't have to write the whole thing out at the end, knowing that I was probably going to have to strike through some notes. Now, the ones I didn't have to strike through, very similar to you. McLaren, so bad. Aston, so bad. Williams, so bad. I didn't write any other notes on those three. I'd just written AlphaTauri. Kind of went about their business. Really nice and tidy race. Gasly driving superbly.
I mean, Gasly's a great driver. And then what I would say is he was bitten by what we later figured out to be, at least as of the time of this recording, a couple minutes after the race, problems with the Red Bull powertrain. So we wrote it off as AlphaTauri at the time in the fire, and it was hot and who knows. And then Max clearly had a problem with the Red Bull powertrain, and then Checo's locked up on him and spun him around. So 3 of 4 Red Bull powertrains didn't finish the race.
So let's just go back through, though, from the kind of... So Gasly's there at the side of the road, right? And,
car on fire.
Car on fire. And what I'd written down was they initially put up virtual safety car. And my notes I wrote down said virtual safety car just completely screwed the Red Bull strategy, because literally the lap before cars gave up, Red Bull had decided to go and put Max on a new set of softs to go chase down.
Right. And the only person who responded was Sainz.
Exactly. So now the chase was on. So it was all about pumping fast. The one thing he couldn't deal with was a virtual safety car. So a free
stop for Charles, right?
Yeah, a virtual safety car screws the Red Bull strategy. Then all of a sudden they update it to a real safety car. I'm like, oh, okay, that's changed the game now. Yes, Leclerc's going to kind of come in and get a new set, but that gap that was going to be maintained under a virtual of whatever it was, 28 down the road or whatever it was after Max had stopped again, that's now nothing. Right. And bless them, the commentators got excited here, because I actually shouted at the TV. They went, and now under safety car, that means the gap from Leclerc to Max, that's going to go to nothing. The gap from Max to Sainz, that's going to go to nothing. And they did it 2 more times. I thought, if you do this for all 20 cars on the track, we get it. You could sum this up in one sentence. All the gaps go away.
It was amazing. I'm happy Charles was far enough out where he could pit. Yes. And it wasn't a hold track position move. It was you have enough time to come in and pit. And it actually, to your point, had Max not pitted 2 or 3 laps before that or whatever it was, he probably couldn't have. I would have actually assumed that Charles would have had to stay out. So it worked to Ferrari's advantage. They were able to pit under the safety car, come back out in first. It was at this point when they slowed everything down that I noticed that Valtteri had moved his way back up into 8th. So, I mean, amazing drive by Valtteri. I don't know what happened in the beginning, but can you imagine if that hadn't happened, where he would have finished? I mean, he really had an amazing drive. And then amazing restart by Charles Leclerc. Max loves I'm going to pull right up next to you and remind you I'm here, which I don't know anyone else who really does that on right before the safety car restart, but he gets right up alongside Charles. And I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. And amazing start by Charles. I love the fact, again, Max almost got overtaken by Carlos. But again, he went in a late break, did a great job, and then just chaos came from there to the end of the race. And again, for Red Bull fans, I know it had to be incredibly difficult. For Max fans, it had to be just so unfortunate to watch. Max ran a great race until his car failed him.
So I haven't had a chance to research this because, like you said, we basically watched the podium presentation, got our equipment together, and jumped on to record. So I don't really know what happened, and they're saying it's the power unit, but when they showed the onboard camera of Gasly, they both, I think it was Brundle, kind of commented to say, oh, everything's gone out. All the lights on his steering wheel, everything's gone. So
Gasly's, he lost everything.
Although the engine is given up to some degree, and it was something electronical as well by the sounds of things, because Max is started as being a suspected something's wrong with the wheels, and they'll go, oh, if one of them's loose, it's going to come off, and then it's like, no, it's the power steering, it's being erratic. Then it was, oh, the power steering's not even working, so Max is really going to have to be manually ratcheting this car through the corner. So it was like, kudos to him, he's keeping this on the track, but the gremlins just seemed to keep unfolding from that point forward, and then ultimately, it's like he knew it was about to happen before it happened, because he said something about, guys, what's happening? And I think they knew on the pit wall that this thing was milliseconds from letting go, because as it happened, I think the pit line, they came on the radio and just basically said, there's nothing you can do. And 10 seconds later, he's coasting into the pit lane.
Well, can we give Max some additional credit? Not only did he coast into the pit lane, I feel like he was battling this thing to keep it moving. But when it was terminal and he knew it was going to be retired, he didn't pull over on the side of the track and allow a yellow to come to solve the rest of the race under caution. He brought it in coasting. I mean, it almost looked like he was pushing it at one point. and he gets it into the pit lane so that if it dies, at the very least, it dies and stops in the pit lane, so they don't have to run the race under yellow to finish it behind a safety car or whatever they would have to do, even a VSC. So I thought it was awesome that he was able to navigate that thing into the pits. But then Formula One TV let me down, because they just kept showing Max in the pits. And meanwhile, there's a race going on with Charles and Carlos, and you got Checo right behind him, and Lewis was making a move on Checo, and I'm like, show the race. We get it. He's the world champion. enough already. We don't need to see him walking into the garage, not garage. And we like, let's move on. And then they go back to the race and they show a replay of Carlos overtaking Max. We know, we saw it. Show us the live action. I was like freaking out.
Is it the same? I'm watching it on ESPN. I don't remember the same, but I'm sure it's the same footage. But maybe not. I don't remember it being. Maybe it was. I was too hyped at the time. I also thought after that restart, do you know what, Haas? It was worth the gamble. It was worth the gamble on Mick. They didn't pit him. They got track position to get him into 10th and just see if he could fight for 5 laps and get the point. And he did. Do you know what? The first 2 laps, I've written down here, they ended the safety car on lap 50. He valiantly defended for the next 2 to 3 laps, a couple of great elbows out maneuvers on Zhou to keep him behind. And I thought, just maybe he can make that car 3 times as wide as it could be. But ultimately, lap 53, I think it was, he got him. And it was like, okay, well...
once he got him, there was open season on
once
Mick
he got him, about 3 cars went past him. And then as if the race hadn't given us enough already, we've got Sainz chasing down Perez. And on the real time when it happened, I thought Sainz must have clipped him. I thought he spun him round.
It was Hamilton.
Hamilton. I thought Hamilton had spun him round because I was like,
I thought he did too. I thought it was an Albon situation 2 times over that Lewis did it to Albon twice back in the day. I was sure he spun him around. So I'm so happy they showed the onboard backwards camera and you saw Lewis wasn't there yet when Checo spun around and whomever it was, I think it was Crofty and I don't know, was it Karun who was filling in for Brundle when he was going to the podium? I think it was Karun. Said it looked like the engine just stopped, locked and the wheel stopped motion and it just spun.
Well, and more than that, more than it not being a tagging by Hamilton when it showed the onboard from Hamilton, wow, did he almost have to do like a Schumacher catching that spin? His reactions to not run into the back of Perez, because that could have easily just been ending for Lewis's race as well, right? Because you know what happens when you kind of catch the front right tyre on a car that's spinning, you're breaking your suspension and you're going home. But He kind of caught that, went round it, and out of nowhere, a race that I'd just written down my notes that I had to strike through, which was kind of a non-event for Mercedes, damage limitation. Lewis gets on the podium. It was just, I was so happy for Ferrari when that final lap came round. I was like, please don't throw any random punches or any of that kind of rubbish at Charles now. So when he came around that corner to take the checkered flag, Sainz in behind him, I did feel sorry for the Red Bull guys for not being there, but Lewis isn't going to be that upset. I thought he was quite magnanimous in his interview to kind of actually volunteer before the interviewer asked, what do you think about the others? He kind of said, look, great day for Ferrari. Big kudos to those guys. A bit upset for the Red Bull guys. Didn't name names, but,
No, I thought it was great. 4 of the top 6 finishers were Ferrari powered. So Ferrari, and then Lewis, and then George, 3rd and 4th. And then Kevin Magnussen and the Haas powered by Ferrari. And then Valtteri, who finished 6th. I mean, you got to give Valtteri credit. I think if he hadn't had that bad start, and the rest of the race finished as it did, he's easily finishing ahead of Magnussen, possibly even going after George, because we saw in qualifying the time was amazing. So Ferrari, Mercedes, Haas, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Ferrari.
So as you mentioned, K-Mag there in 5th.
5th. Amazing.
So how many points did Haas score last year?
0.
and that's off
10.
their back in race 1. That's just such a good. There's the picture that we put out on Instagram, because I think the whole world kind of sent it around there, was the picture between I call him Gunther, but it's not really Gunther, is it? And K-Mag after the qualifying. That there's just the sheer joy on his face, because they've been through it over the last couple of years. And we ran down here to record, so I haven't seen his face after seeing that result. But those guys have got to be so happy and so proud tonight. Because...
Well, and Mick finished 11th, which is, I believe that's his highest finish ever. I think it was 12th last year. So I could be wrong on that. But I mean, even like Zhou Guanyu, right? Finished 10th. He got a point in his rookie debut. That's fantastic. So Alfa Romeo, again, acknowledging Valtteri had a rough start. Otherwise, the race went well for them. 6th and 10th. I mean, they're taking home 9 points. That's great. That's a great start for Alfa Romeo. And so, it's just exciting to see that. And the team we really haven't talked a lot about, which you mispronounced earlier, is Alpine. Alpine came in and Esteban finished seventh, Fernando finished ninth, split by Yuki. So it's fun. You just don't know what to expect. We now have a little more insight into how this is going to work. And I think we do know that at the bottom, obviously not counting Max, not counting Pierre and Checo, who had to retire. We saw Nico was the last car on track. Nico Hulkenberg and the Aston Martin. We had Williams, McLaren, Williams, Aston Martin. So the three teams I mentioned from start were all at the bottom. And Lance, at least at the top of that pile, followed by Alex. So just, I do believe, as we kind of summarize here, I do believe McLaren has brighter days in front of them. I can't, they had so much pace in Spain that I can't believe that pace doesn't exist somewhere else. It's not as though they can't get some of that back. And whether it is, again, the track had a lot of slow speed corners. Next week we go to Saudi Arabia and the Jeddah Corniche circuit, which is a much higher speed track. Maybe that helps. Maybe they can get some of their brake challenges fixed. I just think they have the pace. I, however, think Williams and Aston Martin may be at the bottom for a bit.
Yeah, I was running down qualifying position versus where they finished in the race. Now, obviously, the DNFs kind of skew this a little bit, but pretty much everybody improved or stayed static with the exception of Alonso. Alonso qualified 8th and finished 9th, but everyone else kind of rose, or Leclerc took pole and won it. Sainz was 3rd and came 2nd. Hamilton was 5th and came 3rd. Bottas was 6th and 6th. Magnussen was 7th to 5th. Alonso 8th to 9th. Russell 9th to 4th. And then Gasly was top 10 in qualifying and didn't finish. So it was just good to see that there was that, I think, competitiveness. The one thing that was difficult to try to work out what the lay of the land is going to look like is kind of the safety car right at the end screws it up, because you can't really take the final finish in and see how spread the field was to work out where everyone's true pace is. Because obviously before the safety car came out, we'd had a 2 or 3, maybe 4 cars lapped at that point. It wasn't a huge amount. It wasn't like the leaders had been round and almost lapped all the way back up to like the top 4 again, which we saw quite a few times last year. Now, I don't know whether Bahrain is a circuit that allows that much lapping. I don't know that much about it, but I felt it was not too spread. Midfield seemed fairly in contention. The interview with Toto afterwards, which I did catch, he was talking about how they were asking about the Mercedes power unit and all the Mercedes runners struggled this week. And he almost didn't even tackle that. He just went straight to, I think we ran too much wing. So he's not really going to come out and go, yeah, the Mercedes power unit sucks. He's not going to say that, is he? But it'd be interesting to see what they can do next week. They won't need as much, potentially much wing, I guess. It's the faster circuit. So,
but the Mercedes power unit does not look good. Let's just be honest. The bottom teams, Williams is powered by Mercedes, McLaren is powered by Mercedes, Aston Martin is powered by Mercedes. The bottom 6 finishers are Mercedes powered cars.
Yeah, and he was fairly honest. They said, "What are your thoughts?" And he said, "Well, our thoughts are we're 5th and 6th with a 3rd team on the grid right now." What else is he going to say? Sometimes,
no, I know.
People that interview sometimes do my head in when they kind of ask those real kind of, ask the winner. So, how does that feel to win? What do you want him to say? Awful, really. I wanted to crash out, but
there's a comedian named Brian Regan, and he has a great bit, if people haven't seen it, about giving the losers credit. And he then always takes it to the next step where they're in the losers' locker room, and the reporters come in. Guys, the winners, with all their champagne, are giving you a lot of credit for losing. And so, it's exactly what do you expect from a question like that? So, well, you've heard from us clowns and bozos about the race that happened today, but maybe it's a good idea to kind of shift a little bit and listen to Pit Lane Paul and what he has to say. So Paul was kind enough to send in a rapid response at the end of a late evening in Bahrain for us. And here's what he had to say.
Hey. All the best from sunny Bahrain. So the race has just been completed. I'm back at the hotel now. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, naturally. I'll start from my side with Alfa Romeo and Valtteri. We had a pretty average start, let's be honest. Reasons unknown at the moment, but there was a lot of clutch activity. But the fight back from there was good. The car showed its pace. Guangzhou behind. Yeah, he had considering it's his first race, that was pretty special for him. You know, to finish in the points was pretty amazing. He was strong all race, which is really promising. It's like sensational. But for us again to finish where we did with Valtteri, yeah, you know, there's a tinge of disappointment, which is bizarre, but at the same time a tinge of absolute elation, because when you see the reaction of the team on the back of a result like that from a team who don't score points, it was special. And also with Haas as well, it's like the rise of the underdog. Magnussen, it's just a magical story from their side as well. Up at the front, bizarre for Red Bull. I don't know what you can say. You know, it was never theirs to win with Ferrari's pace, but I mean they will leave feeling devastated. Let's be honest. Ferrari looks superb. They look like they could be the team to beat. Mercedes, they sort of lucked in like we did at the end, but you know they have to be there to take those points. I think for me the biggest surprise is the pace of McLaren. I don't really. That's bizarre where McLaren are. So there've been a lot of fantasy tables that are up on their heads at the moment with all of us who picked a McLaren driver or a McLaren car. So yes, all in all from Bahrain, fantastic first Grand Prix. It was pretty boring. There wasn't a great deal going on, I guess, until the last few laps of the safety car. God forbid another safety car in the last few laps. But with that, and then the Red Bull catastrophe, let's call it that. It was a pretty standard race. The cars held up a lot better than I thought they would. I thought we'd have a lot more reliability issues. So again, I think there's a big mix in the grid. It's interesting to see the cars where they are. So there's a lot to look forward to. So I'm going to have a couple of glasses of red wine tonight. And then, we move on to Saudi Arabia in the week. But fascinating first Grand Prix for different reasons. Keep up the good work, guys. And let's see how that first league table in the fantasy looks like. Ta for now.
That was an amazing report.
Yeah. That is so good. I'm so appreciative of Paul doing that. I mean, it must have been pretty wild after that race in the Alpha Garage because, like he said, the fact that he said tinge of disappointment, it's because, like you said earlier on in our review of what might have been if he hadn't had the clutching issues or whatever we were talking about at the beginning. So
I think he'd have had Magnussen.
Yeah, I think he could well have done. So
and Russell. I think he would have had Russell too, possibly. So I think. Yeah, Valtteri had a great race, and Zhou Guanyu also in the points, as Paul said. I echo what you just said, Rob. Thank you to Pit Lane Paul. It's so cool. I mean, this is like, you know, there's a guy at the race who works at F1 sending us updates, and this is the coolest thing. Paul, you are a rock star, man. Now, he did reference fantasy, and we wanted to talk about it every week. And for anybody who's been checking on the fantasy scoreboards, it's very important to note that it's broken. Again, it is not working. Where's my Lando Norris sound? I'm going to go find it. It is broken. Here we go. What do you think of the fantasy scoring, Lando?
Broken. It's broken.
Exactly. So I don't know what's wrong. It's like not updating. We've waited hours to record this portion. But in the sake of getting things out, what we will do is Rob and I will actually talk about how we did against each other. And then, of course, on social and on our update next week, we will give the appropriate shout out to the winners and mention this. But between Rob and I, we can kind of talk about how we did. So, Rob, how about you tell us who were your team members and constructor this week in fantasy, my friend?
So this week, actually, just before I cover this, as well as give the shout out next week, the moment we know who did win the weekly, then we'll be all over on Twitter as well and give you the shout out there. So keep an eye on there. We'll give the shout out as soon as we can. So this week, things were looking pretty good. My last minute panic move to get rid of Danny Rick to swap him out for Bottas turned out not to be a panic swap. So I was pretty happy with that swap. The other one that I did, and In hindsight, which is a glorious thing, I probably shouldn't have done it. In fact, if I wanted points, I definitely shouldn't have, is I swapped Lewis out for Max at the 11th hour as well, because I just didn't see that the pace was in the Mercedes to be challenging for the win. So I was sitting there feeling pretty smug with a few laps left, thinking Max might even chase Charles down. Sainz is my other driver, and Ferrari is my constructor, and I went double bubble on Haas just because... I'd spent so much money on everybody else, and I had to take Kevin Magnussen. The moment Mazepin was out, and they put Kevin Magnussen, a seasoned F1 driver, in at the same price point as the catastrophe that is Mazepin, that was a no-brainer to go and kind of pick him up. So I was feeling pretty happy about things until the last 2 laps, when I watched my chances nosedive, and I could... I live in the middle of Connecticut, Europe and Chicago. I could feel the beam of your grin when I looked at your lineup and saw who you had and where they finished. I knew I wasn't beating you this week.
Well, yeah. So I would say this. I was excited when Quali was done. My 5 drivers were all in the top 8, I think it was, 8 or 9. They all made it to Q3. And my constructor was kicking some butt. So I picked Ferrari as my constructor this week. I had Charles Leclerc as my turbo driver, and I love that he was on pole. I picked Carlos Sainz. As I said earlier in the episode, Carlos Sainz. I'm all in on Ferrari, and I kind of joked about it on Twitter a little. I made one big bet, and it was on Ferrari. I had both drivers, turboed Leclerc and constructor. But because of that, I needed to figure out how I was going to do this. And actually, I arrived at this late. I'd already had Magnussen locked in. The value just felt too good to be true at the price point. So I went Magnussen and Valtteri. I mean, I've been on Valtteri's bandwagon for quite some time. So I had Magnussen and Valtteri and Charles locked in from the beginning. I turboed Charles, as I said, and I was able to get Sainz and Russell. I had actually had Max in my lineup at one point and removed him so that I could get Ferrari. And then I picked up Russell and Carlos. So, yeah, I was pretty excited. And then, as you said, when Verstappen went out, and again, unfortunate for Max, for the Max fans, and for Red Bull, it means that my 5 drivers finished in the top 6. I don't know how often in the world that can happen because of the salary cap. So I had Leclerc, my turbo, number 1, pole position number 1. I had Carlos, number 2. I did not have Lewis, but I did have George in 4. Kevin in 5, and Valtteri in 6, and Ferrari, who was 1st and 2nd, as my constructor. Now, I do know, I think at least one other team in the league had the same lineup. I kind of clicked around because once quali happened and teams locked, you could see some of the lineups. I think it was still fluky and taking a while. So I clicked on a couple teams just out of curiosity after qualifying. And I think I saw, and I may be wrong, but I think Mark, our 100 seconds of DRS participant from Australia, I believe he had the same lineup I did, I think.
Yeah, I've been online while we were trying to hit refresh and see if we could get the actual leaderboard ready for today's show. I think at one point, I saw I had 199 points and you had 275, but then it's all gone again now. It's all zeros again. So I think that's what it was. I agree with you. I think I saw that Mark had the same lineup. In the meantime, I went on Reddit to find out what was going on, and they're just like, yeah, fantasy servers are down, man. Don't expect that to come up for a while. However, while I was there, I saw a thread which was the most unbeatable driver team lineup this week, not taking into account Mega Driver. And that was yours. Your exact lineup, according to the Reddit community, is the can't be beaten without Mega Drivers. So I would say that begrudgingly, you are top dog. But if Mark is top dog as well, then I always think listeners count more than
100%.
So
yeah, agreed. So I like Mark a lot. So
I think we'll be giving the shout out to Mark. But right now, who knows? Now everyone's back to zeros again. It's impossible to work out. Somebody might have played a really good Mega Driver that was maybe a couple of places back, and they've put a Mega Driver on someone. So as soon as we know, we will tweet it, and then next week we will give the shout out. If Fantasy get their act together by the time we record the show, hopefully we will know who did next week's as well.
But what we do know, and what's most important for me, is how did Brian and Rob do against each other? And that has been solved. That case has been closed. The victim has been chalk outlined, and it looks like Rob Vale has been shot on the ground like the dog that he is, with less points than me. So I beat Rob. I beat Rob. It's so exciting that I beat Rob. Week 1, beat Rob.
Well, it's only week one, Brian, so I will be magnanimous and say well done, but it is just week one. But we have week two to look forward to. So on that perfect segue, we don't even have to wait a weekend to go by. We are straight on down the road. They will pack up the F1 circus and they will head for Saudi Arabia next week to the
cool.
Jeddah circuit. So
and it's great to start with a back-to-back because there aren't a ton of them, actually, believe it or not, throughout the season. So it's fun to have one to get started. And it's interesting because this is the second race of 2022, but in 2021 it was the second to last race. And there were a lot of fireworks, if you remember, at the 2021 race, between Max giving places back and some of the Max and Lewis interactions and the team radio from Michael Massey giving offers of where people could be. We don't have to go into any of that. What I took away from 2021, Lewis finished first, Max was second, Valtteri in the Mercedes third, Esteban Ocon in the Alpine was fourth, and then Danny Rick in McLaren finished fifth. So with those finishes, it's a very, very high speed track. And in my mind, it's some kind of weird hybrid between Baku and Azerbaijan, which is a street circuit, but has a fast section and fast half to it, combined with something like Monza, which is just the temple of speed. And you put these together and it's a very high speed street circuit with walls around it. Precision is required for the entirety of the race. It is a little scary. I mean, you clip a wall a little bit with your tire, as we saw Max do in quali last year, 2021 at Saudi Arabia, and you can have pretty significant damage. So I'm excited to watch it. And this is why I was saying before about McLaren. I think we're going to learn a lot in week two of this season about McLaren. We'll see how bad their issues really are, because this should play into their hand, meaning the troubles they have with their car should be not as evident in week two. Am I putting them in my fantasy lineup? Probably not yet. But if there's going to be an opportunity to see them maybe bounce back really fast, this might be it. So I'm not banking on it, but I'm saying maybe they won't be at the end of the train this week.
Yeah, I mean, the only downside for everybody that's in the back half of the grid is that, do you honestly believe that we're going to avoid the red flag syndrome of last year? You know, what's changed? The walls are still there. The circuit's still as fast. Cars can now follow each other closer at high speeds. I mean, today we saw 3 cars retire, all through what looks like mechanical, electrical failure. We didn't see anybody losing it, binning it into walls, debris everywhere. I will put money on it with you, Brian, that trend will get reversed next week. I just can't see this being a true... Not a true test. That's unfair, because it's a true test. It's it's a race, and we will get a winner. But I've got a funny feeling that someone is going to fall victim to somebody else binning it this week. And now, if you're at the back, the further back you are, the higher the risk you are of being collected along the way, right? If you can get out and get away, then you tend to not get caught up in this crap. But if you are mid to back, and someone loses it at a high-speed corner, then you've got 5-6 cars all trying to react in an instant, trying to go in the right direction, and someone gets unlucky. So it could play into Danny Rick's hand. He could get to tiptoe through the through the debris and make up a whole bunch of places. But I do not see this being a race where I will say less cars will finish next week than finish today.
I could see that. I could see it being about 3 or 4 non-finishers. I'm just excited. We're going to learn a lot. So basically, we'll have 2 races under our belt, and we'll know the cars that are better at the high-speed tracks and the cars that are better, as we saw this week, at the low-speed, kind of low-speed corner tracks. And so it'll be a good feel for how the ground effect is providing the downforce for the variety of cars. So I don't have the answers yet. The same way we went in this week, kind of curious. I'm going in curious. However, I feel like we'll have good templates for the remaining parts of the season, and a good feel for what to expect. Not necessarily how the way cars will get developed to handle it, but I'm just excited to watch. Quite honestly, I'm excited to watch Ferrari Red Bull round 2 is what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I just think, I was just looking back over last year, we lost 5 cars to accidents last year. So 15 out of 20 finished. At least it's a line in the sand to try to beat.
Yeah, for sure. No, it'll be good. I mean, I like you said, I'm really looking forward to it. It's a couple hours later for everyone watching here in the States. I believe it starts. So this week was 10 Central. I have it at noon in my calendar for next week. So Central. But just confirm that. And again, from a fantasy perspective, make sure to have your lineups in before qualifying starts on Saturday of next week. So just excited for Saudi Arabia and the race. Anything else, Rob, you'd want to highlight before we kind of close with one last segment?
No, just great start. Absolutely loved it. I was worried it was going to be a damp squib and we weren't going to get a great race, and I was 100% wrong and happy to be so. So really looking forward to next week and seeing what these cars can do on that circuit. But now we're going to finish off what we started last week. I can't say I'm thrilled about it, Brian, but we're going to finish off the Drive to Survive review.
Yeah, we should do it just for the sake of completion, for people who watch, to have the conversation. There's pieces we can kind of hit lightly, but I was really looking forward to Drive to Survive, and I would ask Netflix if they could release it like a week earlier. Give us 2 weeks from Drive to Survive to the first race. They threw it right before the racing started and with testing, and to me, it kind of got lost. I enjoyed it. Probably not as much as years past. I know we hit the first 3 episodes. What we hit on episode 4 that is, it's about Haas and the difference of having Nikita there and his dad and feeling that their car wasn't as good as Mick's. It was fascinating to watch. And like I said earlier in this episode, it turned out that whole year was an investment for 2022. And an investment that Nikita wasn't there to see through. The one thing I would say, and again, they do a lot. There was a lot of tricky editing and a lot of people saying, I didn't say, drivers saying, I didn't say that at that time. Team radio being used at different points.
Yeah.
But did Nikita Mazepin actually say in the car as he's driving in Sochi that he saw the weather coming and I know Russian weather and it's going to rain, and he went to the early intermediates? If that's true, amazing. And I think it is based on what I saw, but he's a weatherman. Nikita Mazepin has a future doing weather in Russia because he was bang on that one.
I would say that episode 4 was my favorite of the entire series.
Really?
Yeah.
Not for me, but okay. Tell me why.
No, just because it had the least amount of Netflix orchestration. I was getting angrier the more I watched this series, the more they were doing it, right? There was even the thing that I brought up last week when I mentioned about the back and forth thing. The WTF1 guys that we follow, they had a YouTube or an Instagram reel doing exactly the same thing. How many times through this series am I going to go back in time and it's Monaco again? It just...
Totally true.
And I sent you that picture of the horse drawing, season 1 being the artist, and then season 4 being a crayon drawing of the horse's head. I mean, it maybe wasn't that bad, but anyway, I like the Has episode. I really like Gunther, however we say it.
Gunther Steiner?
Yeah, he's just awesome.
Him selling that boat, sitting in front of that boat is going to be the meme of the year. We'll send some out, I'm sure, of it as well. But I love Steiner.
I loved it for 2 reasons. I loved it for that. I just loved his kind of, even though he knew the team sucks, he's just got this relentless energy and passion to just want to keep doing better each time. But I love the F-bombs and his cursing in English is fantastic. God knows how he can curse in his own language, probably even worse. But it's awesome. I did like the thing with the bitching and moaning about how Mick's got a better car. I was like, has it ever struck you that maybe Mazepin's not very good?
Exactly. I mean, that's why Steiner said when he was on the pit wall, he goes, that's why people don't like you. There are other reasons, but I can't believe he said that and said it with people watching. And then, like you said, we go back to McLaren. It was like the whole season was effectively McLaren and Max and Lewis.
Yep.
They can't get enough of Danny Rick at Netflix, and he's a great personality. But for episode 5, again, we hit McLaren, Zach Brown on the ice skating, saying you can't let them see you panic. You have to be in charge. And then he wipes out humongously onto his ass backwards.
That was brilliant.
Oof, and he just lays there for a while. I'm like, nailed it. You look like a leader right there, Zach. And then it was just, again, you go to Monza, the only 1-2 for a constructor last year. We've already replicated that this year with Ferrari.
But I was so angry at that. They spent all the time building up to it. And then the podium and the shoey, blink and you miss it. Gone.
I know. That's true.
I'm like, hang on a minute. If you're new to this sport and you're trying to use this as a way to get everybody in, at least at least spend a bit of time on the legend that is the shoey. Literally, I think it was done in a 3-second montage of rapid fire clips where you saw him like lift the shoe up to his mouth, and then it was never even called out. And so you get me angry again now.
Well, and also, I mean, Netflix here messed up. They said Max won the sprint race at Monza. He didn't. Valtteri won.
Yeah.
But he had an engine penalty, so he didn't start on pole. And so, but they said, oh, Max Verstappen, finishes first. No, he didn't. And so the way they showed it was not correct. And I would say this, the thing I took away from 5 was the Mercedes Ferrari conversations of having rivals. So like it goes like this: Ferrari and McLaren were rivals last year, and Zach and Andreas and Mattia, you didn't see them running around like smacked asses like Christian Horner, screaming and yelling and being rude and disgusting to their rivals. You didn't see Toto doing that. And again, I know it's dramatization for TV, but to me, the only people I came away this season liking less were Christian Horner. I didn't like George Russell as much, and Nikita Mazepin. To me, those 3 characters, they really, and again, I'm being swayed by the way they show it. I know that. But those 3 folks just didn't come across in the best light, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then we I'll let you pick the bones apart from 6 and 7, because I've got to be honest, episodes 6 and 7 to me were like, when you get a new album and from an artist you really like, and there's a couple of album tracks on there, a couple of fillers just to make sure there's 10 tracks on the album, then 6 and 7 to me were filler tracks.
I mean, it was George in his undies in episode 6 for Williams. He goes, and then he made a Valtteri comment about having his ass hanging out. I'm like, yeah, okay, we've made that too. Not much else there. 7, the youngsters, seeing Yuki and Pierre versus, I guess I would say Esteban, because Fernando's clearly not a youngster. But it was interesting, the AlphaTauri and Alpine fight, comparing 1 and 2. I did not know Yuki was quite that lazy in his beginning of F1. It seemed like he wasn't at the end. But he said, I hate working out in the morning because it ruins the whole day. My muscles are sore. Dude, that's the point of working out. I love that kid. He's awesome. So, yeah, and then they did show Hungary. And again, here's the difference. Netflix is not a documentary. It's a drama show about Formula One. So when they show Esteban winning in Hungary, they never showed Fernando Alonso's amazing defense. 5 laps or 4 laps or whatever it was of the best defending in the modern era was him holding up Lewis Hamilton in Hungary. And I may have fallen asleep for a second. So if they did it, it was very fast, but trust me, they didn't do it enough. That was my problem with episode 7.
Exactly.
They just messed the race up.
And if you're making a drama of it, surely that was a gift, because you could have had dramatic music, you'd have had lots of camera angles of Hamilton trying to get past Alonso, and pit stop radio of what the gap was, and then when Lewis finally got him, it not making a difference to the result. But like you say, they just kind of washed over it, and that's.
I mean, agreed. And then honestly, I'm not going to talk a lot about 9 and 10. It was just Red Bull versus Mercedes, Max versus Lewis. I didn't know Max was sick in Saudi Arabia, and and Max doesn't want to participate. Some of the behind the scenes footage, like I said, I liked Max more coming out of this. I respect the hell out of him anyway. I thought it was great. That's all I have for 9 and 10. So I'm gonna go backwards to 8. George and Valtteri. Valtteri is so thoughtful. I feel like he could be on the edge of control in a race car, yet still have philosophical ideas. That guy is awesome. And it was amazing. And then, did Netflix really capture Toto telling George behind a dumpster he's going to be the next Mercedes driver? Was that real?
I don't know. And because at this point I was already kind of getting quite angry as the season to me was kind of descending into just, I don't know, maybe it is good for new fans in, but they got the balance wrong in this season for me, for being the drama to entice the new viewer into the sport versus giving something for the fan to enjoy that watched all of last season. To me, it was more enjoyable watching last season as a racing season than watching how Netflix stitched it back together. I was just disappointed by it. That episode, they seem to want to cast George in the villain role. He's the nasty youngster that's coming to steal nice man Bottas's seat. And okay, maybe that is. They must have repeated the same thing over and over and over again in that episode about, well, young, bright new drivers are going to come through and challenge for the seats of the kind of elder statesmen. I was like, well, yeah, you said that in about the opening 2 minutes, and now you've said that theme about 20 times. As you can tell, Brian, I'm not the biggest fan of this installment of the Drive to Survive seasons.
I would agree. It also somehow brought up Spa without actually going into what a farce it was. I don't know how you do that. They brought up Spa, but you don't talk about the craziest race. It's not even a race of the year. And they didn't even get the best team radio of the season.
It's going to haunt me for life.
When Lewis... You remember that? Here's the longer version.
When I went to the toilet, the one I went to, someone had dropped a crazy bomb in there. It was the worst thing ever. It's going to haunt me for life.
So, I mean, how do you not even mention that? And just the torrential rain. And yes, they showed Lando and what happened. But just to me, I'll close on that and say I'm happy they dropped it. I enjoyed it. It was fun to watch. It was too much focused on the drama. I think they manufactured some of it more so than in years past. And like I said, I actually dislike Christian Horner more than I disliked him to start with, which is pretty hard. And George, I liked a little less because, again, they ginned up this whole "I'm coming for your seat" thing. But some of the stuff he did say, and seemed like he was getting a little full of himself at points. But again, I don't even know what to trust anymore from this. So I'm not putting too much stock in it. It was a fun thing to watch. I enjoyed it. I do like some of the behind the scenes parts. I liked basically everybody more. Max, Lewis, Carlos, Charles, Pierre, Yuki. I mean, sign me up. It was fun. I'll watch it again next year, but I don't know if I'm going to binge it in a night trying to get through it all, or 2 nights. I don't know if I need it that bad.
I guess, my closing remark on it would be that it was a bit disappointing because there were snippets in every episode where you went, yeah, that's good. I like how you did that. I like how we see the behind-the-scenes stuff that we don't see when we watch the race. That was your secret sauce of the first couple of seasons. You've now tried to segue that with some kind of big, huge manufactured drama over the top of it, and they just lost the balance a little bit. A bit like tire balance, right? They've shifted too much balance to the front of the car.
Well, I mean, in all seriousness, I think you just said something really important that I hadn't thought of it this way. I think the first couple seasons were driven by the races and some of the behind the scenes pieces of those races. And the races were the storyline. I feel like the fourth installment was driven by drama and the races unfolded around it. And that's not the right way. That's not the right balance of it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that I do, the episodes even were based on drama as opposed to races. And there were so many races that had great drama naturally that I think they could have covered even better. So yeah, I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. Enjoyed it. I'll watch it again, of course. Picking it apart has been fun, but do I need to invest, a whole night's sleep in it like I have in the past? Probably not anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. I'd probably concur on the 6.5 out of 10. I think it's more the disappointment. I was hoping it was going to be an 8 or a 9. So
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think that we need to go and calm down after a very exciting day, get our thoughts together, and take a very short break before we're back at all this all over again, doing it this time next week, Brian. So I will let you do your usual closeout, my friend.
I just want to say thanks to everyone for listening. We had a wonderful first race. Enjoyed watching it at Bahrain. Thanks for participating with us on social and in fantasy and everywhere else. Please let us know what we can do better. We're always trying. So be well, be safe, be kind. We'll see you in a week after Saudi Arabia.
Cheers, guys.